The morning sun cast long shadows across the military academy grounds as Marcus Thompson adjusted his dress blue uniform one final time. His hands trembled slightly, not from nervousness, but from the overwhelming pride that filled his chest. After 4 grueling years of academic excellence, rigorous training, and countless sacrifices, this day had finally arrived. His graduation from the prestigious Naval Academy was more than just a personal achievement, it was the culmination of a dream that had sustained him through the darkest moments of his life. Marcus stood 6 feet tall with broad shoulders that spoke of countless hours in the gym and training fields. His dark skin gleamed with a healthy sheen, and his eyes held the determined spark that had carried him through every challenge the academy had thrown his way. Today, those eyes sparkled with anticipation as he thought about his family making the long journey from Detroit to witness this momentous occasion. The academy's ancient brick building stood majestically around the central courtyard where the ceremony would take place. Banners fluttered in the gentle breeze, displaying the proud insignia of the institution that had shaped some of the finest military leaders in the nation's history. White chairs arranged in perfect rows awaited the families, friends, and distinguished guests who would witness the transformation of cadets into officers. Marcus had earned his place here through sheer determination and academic excellence. Growing up in a neighborhood where many of his friends had chosen different paths, he had remained focused on his goal of serving his country with honor. His mother, Sarah Thompson, had worked double shifts at the local hospital to help support his dreams, while his younger sister had cheered him on from the sidelines of every achievement. The transformation from the scared 18-year-old who had first walked through these gates to the confident young man he had become was nothing short of remarkable. Marcus had excelled in every aspect of academy life, from the rigorous academic curriculum to the demanding physical training that pushed cadets to their absolute limits. His professors had noted his natural leadership abilities, and his fellow cadets respected his integrity and unwavering moral compass. As he made his way toward the assembly area, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The late night studying by lamplight, the physical training sessions that left him exhausted but stronger, the leadership exercises that had taught him the weight of responsibility he would soon carry as a Marine officer. Every challenge had been worth it for this moment. The academy grounds buzzed with activity as families began arriving for the ceremony. Parents proudly wore their best clothes, siblings clutched cameras and flowers, and the air was filled with an electric sense of celebration. Marcus could see other graduating cadets embracing their loved ones, sharing tears of joy and pride that had been years in the making. His own family would be arriving soon. His mother had called the night before, her voice thick with emotion as she told him how proud she was of the man he had become. His sister had been practicing her speech for the family dinner they had planned afterward, and even his stoic grandfather, a veteran himself, had admitted to being excited about seeing his grandson commissioned as an officer. The morning progressed with the familiar rhythm of military precision. Graduating cadets moved through their final preparations with the efficiency that had been drilled into them over 4 years of training. Uniforms were inspected to ensure every button, every crease, every insignia was perfectly placed. This attention to detail had become second nature, but today it carried special significance as they prepared to represent the finest traditions of military service. Marcus's roommate, David Chen, approached with a broad smile. They had been through everything together, from the brutal first year that had seen many of their classmates leave, to the advanced leadership courses that had prepared them for the responsibilities they would soon shoulder. David's family had already arrived from California, and he was practically glowing with excitement. "Can you believe we actually made it?" David asked, adjusting his own uniform with the nervous energy that seemed to affect everyone on graduation day. "4 years ago, I wasn't sure I'd survive the first semester, and now look at us." Marcus nodded, sharing his friend's amazement at how far they had all come. The academy had a way of transforming young people, not just physically but mentally and emotionally. They had learned not just military tactics and leadership principles, but also the deeper values of service, sacrifice, and dedication to something greater than themselves. The two friends had supported each other through every challenge the academy had presented. When Marcus had struggled with advanced calculus during his sophomore year, David had spent countless hours helping him master the concepts. When David had faced a crisis of confidence during a particularly difficult leadership exercise, Marcus had been there to remind him of his strengths and encourage him to persevere. As they walked toward the ceremonial area, other graduating cadets joined them, creating a sea of crisp blue uniforms moving with purpose and pride. These young men and women represented the future of military leadership, each having proven themselves capable of handling the immense responsibilities that would soon be placed upon their shoulders. The Academy's commandant had spoken to them the previous evening about the significance of this transition. They were no longer cadets learning to become leaders, they were now officers who would be trusted with the lives of the men and women who would serve under their command. The weight of this responsibility was something each of them felt deeply, but it was a burden they were prepared and honored to carry. Marcus thought about the Marines he would soon lead. These would be brave men and women who had chosen to serve their country, and they deserved leaders who would never ask them to do something they wouldn't do themselves. The Academy had instilled this principle deeply in every graduate, and Marcus was determined to live up to these high standards. The ceremony would begin in just a few hours, and already Marcus could see families beginning to gather in the designated seating areas. The sight of proud parents and excited siblings filled him with warmth, but also with a growing sense of anticipation for his own family's arrival. He checked his phone for any messages and saw a text from his mother saying they were running slightly behind schedule but would be there in plenty of time. As the morning continued, Marcus and his fellow graduates went through their final rehearsal. Every step of the ceremony had been practiced countless times, from the precise march onto the field to the moment when they would receive their commissions as officers. The military precision that governed every aspect of academy life was never more evident than during these formal ceremonies. The graduates moved as one unit, their steps perfectly synchronized, their bearing proud and confident. Years of training had made these movements automatic, but today they carried special meaning. This was their final act as cadets, their last moment before stepping into the roles that would define their military careers. Marcus felt a surge of emotion as he looked around at his classmates. These were the people who had shared his struggles and triumphs, who had pushed him to be better and had been there to support him when he stumbled. The bonds formed during these 4 years would last a lifetime, creating a network of brotherhood and sisterhood that would endure long after their military service ended. The Academy's traditions weighed heavily on this day. Generations of military leaders had stood where Marcus now stood, feeling the same mix of pride, anticipation, and responsibility. The young man from Detroit was about to join the ranks of those who would serve their country with distinction, carrying forward the values and principles that made the military a force for good in the world. As the rehearsal concluded, Marcus made his way to the designated waiting area where graduates would gather before the ceremony began. The energy was electric, with conversations buzzing around him as his classmates shared their excitement and nervousness about the day ahead. Some were discussing their first assignments, others were talking about the family members who had traveled great distances to be there. Marcus found himself thinking about his grandfather, who had served in Vietnam and whose stories of military life had first sparked his interest in service. The old man had never spoken much about his combat experiences, but his quiet pride in his service had made a deep impression on young Marcus. Today, his grandfather would see that influence come full circle as Marcus began his own military career. The waiting area gradually filled with graduates, creating a sea of blue uniforms and nervous energy. Academy staff moved among them, making final checks and offering words of encouragement. The transformation that had taken place over 4 years was evident in every face. These young people carried themselves with confidence and dignity that came from having met every challenge placed before them. Marcus looked at his watch and realized his family should be arriving soon. The thought of seeing his mother's proud face when he received his commission filled him with warmth. She had sacrificed so much to help him achieve this dream, working extra shifts and going without luxuries so that he could focus on his studies and training. The morning sun had risen higher, casting the academy grounds in brilliant light that made everything seem to glow with possibility. This was more than just a graduation ceremony, it was the beginning of a new chapter in Marcus's life, one filled with responsibility, challenge, and the opportunity to serve something greater than himself. As he stood among his fellow graduates, Marcus Thompson felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The academy had prepared him well, not just with knowledge and skills, but with the character and integrity that would guide him through his military career. Today was just the beginning of a journey that would test everything he had learned, but he faced it with confidence and determination. The sound of approaching vehicles indicated that families were beginning to arrive in earnest. Marcus felt his heart rate increase as he anticipated seeing his loved ones, knowing that their presence would make this already special day even more meaningful. Everything was perfect, and nothing could diminish the joy and pride of this momentous occasion. Or so he thought. The Thompson family's old sedan pulled into the visitor parking area with a slight wheeze from the engine, a sound that had become familiar during the long drive from Detroit. Sarah Thompson turned off the ignition and sat for a moment, taking in the magnificent sight of the Naval Academy spread before them. The stately buildings and manicured grounds spoke of tradition, honor, and excellence, everything she had dreamed of for her son. "We made it," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion as she looked at the institution that had shaped Marcus into the man he had become. Beside her, Marcus's younger sister Angela bounced with excitement, while their grandfather, Robert Thompson, sat quietly in the back seat, his weathered hands folded over his walking cane. The family had left Detroit before dawn, driving through the night to ensure they wouldn't miss a moment of Marcus's special day. Sarah had taken time off from her job at the hospital, something she rarely did, but nothing could have kept her from witnessing her son's graduation. She had watched him grow from a determined little boy who declared he would serve his country, to the accomplished young man who was about to receive his commission as a Marine officer. As they stepped out of the car, the difference between their modest background and the polished environment of the academy was immediately apparent. Other families emerged from luxury vehicles, dressed in expensive clothes and carrying professional cameras. But Sarah held her head high, knowing that her son belonged here just as much as anyone else. His merit and hard work had earned him this place, and that was worth more than any amount of money. Angela had saved money from her part-time job to buy a new dress for the occasion, and she looked radiant in the pale blue outfit that complemented her brother's uniform colors. She carried a bouquet of flowers they had picked from their neighbor's garden, with permission of course, because buying expensive arrangements wasn't in their budget. But the love and pride behind the gesture made those simple flowers more precious than any elaborate display. Grandfather Robert moved slowly but determinedly, his old combat boots clicking against the pavement. He had insisted on wearing his own military decorations for the ceremony, proudly displaying the medals he had earned during his service in Vietnam. The old soldier's eyes swept over the academy grounds with approval, recognizing the institution's commitment to building character and leadership. The family followed the signs directing them toward the ceremony area, joining streams of other visitors making their way to the celebration. Sarah couldn't help but notice the differences between their group and the others around them, but she pushed those thoughts aside. Today was about Marcus and his achievements, not about comparing their family to others. As they approached the main ceremony area, Sarah spotted Marcus among a group of graduating cadets. Even from a distance, she could see how the academy had changed him. He stood taller, moved with confidence, and carried himself with the bearing of a natural leader. The scared teenager who had left home 4 years ago had been transformed into a man ready to take on the world. "There he is!" Angela exclaimed, waving enthusiastically in Marcus's direction. Her brother spotted them and his face lit up with a brilliant smile that reminded Sarah of the little boy who used to run to greet her after school. Some things never changed, and the love between their family was one of those constants that would endure forever. Marcus began making his way toward them, but before he could reach his family, a security guard stepped into his path. The man was middle-aged, with a stern expression and a uniform that marked him as academy security rather than military personnel. He looked Marcus up and down with obvious disapproval, his gaze lingering on Marcus's face in a way that made Sarah's stomach tighten with unease. "Excuse me," the guard said, his voice loud enough to draw attention from nearby families. "This area is restricted to graduates and their families. You'll need to show me your identification and proof of your connection to today's ceremony." Marcus stopped short, confusion evident on his face. Around them, other graduates were freely moving about, greeting their families without any such challenges. The guard's request seemed both unusual and unnecessary, given that Marcus was clearly wearing the uniform of a graduating cadet. "Sir, I'm Marcus Thompson," Marcus replied politely, maintaining the respectful tone that had been drilled into him during his academy training. "I'm graduating today, and these are my family members coming to attend the ceremony." The guard looked skeptical, his eyes narrowing as he studied Marcus more closely. You're telling me you're one of the graduates? I find that hard to believe. Show me some identification and documentation proving your status here. The question hung in the air like a dark cloud, changing the entire atmosphere of what should have been a joyful reunion. Sarah felt her heart sink as she realized what was happening. Despite all of Marcus's achievements, despite the uniform he wore and the dignity he carried himself with, this man saw only the color of his skin. Other families nearby had begun to notice the commotion, some stopping to watch the unusual scene unfold. Marcus could feel their eyes on him, and the shame that washed over him was not for himself but for the institution he had served so faithfully. This was not how the academy was supposed to work, not what it was supposed to represent. Sir, I understand your need to maintain security, Marcus continued, his voice steady despite the humiliation he felt. But, as you can see from my uniform and insignia, I am indeed a graduating cadet. My family has traveled a long way to be here today. The guard remained unmoved, crossing his arms in a gesture that made his suspicion abundantly clear. Anyone can put on a uniform. I need to see proper documentation before I can allow you to proceed. This is a secure facility, and we can't have unauthorized individuals wandering around. Sarah stepped forward, her maternal instincts overriding her natural tendency to avoid confrontation. She had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to watch her son be humiliated on what should have been the proudest day of his life. My son is a graduating cadet, she said firmly, her voice carrying the authority that came from years of standing up for her patients at the hospital. He has earned his place here through 4 years of hard work and dedication. This treatment is completely inappropriate. The guard turned his attention to Sarah, his expression showing even less respect for her than he had shown for Marcus. Ma'am, I'm just doing my job. If your son is really who he claims to be, then showing identification shouldn't be a problem. The situation was escalating, drawing more attention from the growing crowd of observers. Some family members looked sympathetic, while others seemed uncomfortable with the scene unfolding before them. Marcus felt caught between his desire to defend himself and his training to respect authority, even when that authority was being exercised unjustly. Angela moved closer to her brother, her young face showing confusion and anger at what she was witnessing. She had always looked up to Marcus as her hero, and seeing him treated with such disrespect was breaking her heart. Grandfather Robert leaned heavily on his cane, his old eyes burning with a fury that spoke of too many years of witnessing such injustices. Young man, the grandfather said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of experience and sacrifice, my grandson has earned his place here through merit and dedication. Your behavior is a disgrace to the uniform you wear and the institution you represent. The guard's response was swift and harsh. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to calm down. If you continue to be disruptive, I'll have no choice but to call for additional security to have you removed from the premises. The threat hung in the air like a sword about to fall. The Thompson family had traveled hundreds of miles and spent money they could barely afford to be here for Marcus's graduation, and now they were being threatened with removal because a security guard couldn't accept that a young black man belonged among the academy's graduates. Marcus felt his world beginning to crumble around him. All the pride and joy he had felt moments before was being replaced by shame and anger that threatened to overwhelm him. This was not how his story was supposed to unfold. This was not the America he had pledged to serve and defend. The crowd of observers had grown larger, creating a circle around the confrontation that made Marcus feel like he was on display in the worst possible way. Some people were taking pictures with their phones, capturing what should have been a private family moment and turning it into a public spectacle. Just when it seemed like the situation couldn't get any worse, Marcus heard a familiar voice cutting through the tension like a blade through butter. What the hell is going on here? The voice belonged to Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, one of Marcus's favorite instructors and a man who had become something of a mentor during his time at the academy. Morrison was approaching with several other figures, but Marcus was too focused on the relief of seeing a friendly face to notice who else was coming. Morrison's eyes quickly assessed the situation, taking in the defensive posture of the security guard, the obvious distress of the Thompson family, and the growing crowd of onlookers. His expression darkened as he realized what was happening to one of his most promising students. Officer Rodriguez," Morrison addressed the guard by name, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of military authority. "Please explain to me why you are detaining Cadet Thompson and his family." The guard, Rodriguez, suddenly looked less confident as he faced a superior officer. "Sir, this individual was attempting to access the restricted ceremony area without proper identification. I was simply following security protocols." Morrison's response was immediate and uncompromising. "Cadet Thompson is one of our top graduates and has every right to be here. His uniform and insignia should have been identification enough for anyone with eyes to see. Stand down immediately." But Rodriguez wasn't ready to back down completely. "Sir, with respect, security protocols require verification of identity for all individuals accessing secure areas. I was simply doing my job as outlined in Academy regulations." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus stood frozen between relief at Morrison's intervention and continued humiliation at the very fact that such intervention was necessary. His family clustered around him, offering silent support while trying to process what they were witnessing. Morrison stepped closer to Rodriguez, his voice dropping to a level that was somehow more threatening than if he had shouted. "Your job is to provide security, not to harass graduating cadets and their families. Cadet Thompson has been at this academy for 4 years. His face should be familiar to anyone who has been paying attention." The confrontation was about to escalate to an entirely new level, but before Morrison could continue, another voice joined the conversation. This time, it came from behind Marcus, and when he turned to see who had spoken, his eyes widened in surprise. Standing there were 6 men in dress uniforms, but these weren't academy instructors or regular military officers. The insignia on their uniforms marked them as Navy SEALs, elite special operations forces whose very presence commanded respect and attention. Their bearing and confidence spoke of men who had faced real danger and emerged victorious. The leader of the group, a tall man with graying temples and eyes that seemed to see everything, stepped forward. His name tag read Commander Thompson, and when Marcus saw it, he realized this couldn't be a coincidence. "Gentlemen," the SEAL commander said, his voice calm but carrying an undertone that suggested very serious consequences for anyone who crossed him, "I couldn't help but notice that there seems to be some confusion here. Perhaps someone would like to explain what's happening?" The arrival of the SEALs had transformed the entire dynamic of the situation. Rodriguez looked suddenly uncertain, while Morrison seemed both relieved and curious about these unexpected allies. The crowd of onlookers had grown even larger, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. Marcus found himself at the center of a storm that was about to break in ways he couldn't possibly have imagined. Commander James Thompson stepped forward with the measured confidence of a man who had led dangerous missions in the darkest corners of the world. His weathered face bore the lines of someone who had seen combat, made life-and-death decisions under pressure, and earned the respect of the most elite fighting force in the military. Behind him stood 5 other Navy SEALs, each man a warrior in his own right, their presence transforming the academic ceremony into something far more significant. The SEAL commander's eyes swept over the scene, taking in every detail with the practiced efficiency of a tactical assessment. He saw the young Marine cadet standing at attention despite the obvious stress he was under, the family clustered protectively nearby, the security guard who was beginning to realize he might have made a serious mistake, and the growing crowd of witnesses to what was rapidly becoming an incident. "Commander Thompson," Lieutenant Commander Morrison said, recognizing the SEAL officer and clearly relieved to have such powerful support arriving on the scene. "Sir, we have a situation here involving one of our top graduating cadets." The SEAL commander nodded slowly, his gaze settling on Marcus with an intensity that seemed to see straight through to the young man's soul. What he saw there clearly satisfied him, because when he spoke again, there was unmistakable approval in his voice. "I can see that," Commander Thompson replied. "And, from what I've observed, this young Marine has been conducting himself with exemplary discipline and respect, even in the face of treatment that would test anyone's patience." Marcus felt a surge of pride at the commander's words, but he remained at attention, unsure of what was happening but grateful for the support. He had no way of knowing that these 6 SEALs had been walking across the academy grounds when they noticed the commotion, or that their leader shared his last name for reasons that were far from coincidental. Rodriguez, the security guard, was beginning to look genuinely uncomfortable as he found himself facing not just a lieutenant commander but a full commander backed by 5 of the most dangerous men in the military. The balance of power in this confrontation had shifted dramatically, and he was no longer the one in control of the situation. "Sir," Rodriguez said, trying to maintain his authority while clearly feeling the ground shifting beneath his feet, "I was simply following established security protocols." This individual was attempting to access a restricted area without proper identification. Commander Thompson turned his full attention to the security guard, and the temperature in the immediate area seemed to drop several degrees. When SEALs focused their attention on someone, it was an experience that few people forgot. "Security protocols," the commander repeated slowly, as if tasting the words and finding them distasteful. "Tell me, Officer Rodriguez, how many years have you been working security at this academy?" 3 years, sir," Rodriguez replied, though his voice had lost much of its earlier confidence. 3 years, Commander Thompson nodded. "And, in those 3 years, how many times have you stopped other graduating cadets and demanded identification before allowing them to proceed to ceremony areas?" The question hung in the air like a challenge that everyone present knew Rodriguez couldn't answer honestly. The crowd of onlookers had grown even larger, and many of them were now recording the interaction on their phones. What had started as a private humiliation for Marcus was becoming a very public reckoning. Rodriguez's silence spoke volumes, but Commander Thompson wasn't finished with him yet. "Let me help you with that question, Officer Rodriguez. The answer is never. You have never stopped any other cadet and demanded identification under these circumstances. Which raises the obvious question of why this particular cadet merited such unusual treatment." The SEAL commander's voice remained calm and professional, but there was steel beneath the surface that promised serious consequences if the right answers weren't provided. Behind him, his 5 teammates stood like statues, their presence a reminder that these were men who had faced down terrorists and enemy soldiers without flinching. Marcus watched the scene unfold with a mixture of amazement and growing hope. He had felt so alone and helpless just moments before, but now he had powerful allies standing up for him. The shame and humiliation that had threatened to overwhelm him were being replaced by something else entirely. Lieutenant Commander Morrison stepped closer to the group, adding his voice to the growing pressure on Rodriguez. "Commander Thompson raises an excellent point. I've been observing Academy security procedures for years, and I've never seen a graduating cadet challenged in this manner, especially not someone wearing a proper uniform with all appropriate insignia clearly displayed." Sarah Thompson watched from beside her son, her heart swelling with gratitude for these men who had stepped forward to defend Marcus when he needed it most. She didn't understand all the military protocols and hierarchies at play, but she could see that her son now had powerful protectors who weren't going to let injustice stand unchallenged. Angela clutched her flowers tighter, her young mind trying to process the rapid changes in the situation. Her brother had gone from being humiliated and threatened to being defended by what looked like real-life action heroes. The Navy SEALs looked exactly like the characters from the movies she loved, except these men were real and they were fighting for her family. Grandfather Robert leaned heavily on his cane, but his old eyes were bright with approval as he watched the confrontation unfold. He had seen too much injustice in his long life, and witnessing these warriors stand up for his grandson filled him with a satisfaction that went bone deep. Commander Thompson took another step closer to Rodriguez, his voice dropping to a level that somehow made his words more threatening than if he had shouted them. "I'm going to ask you a direct question, Officer Rodriguez, and I want a direct answer. Do you believe that this cadet's race influenced your decision to challenge his presence here today?" The question cut through all the pretense and got directly to the heart of what everyone present understood was really happening. Rodriguez's face went pale as he realized he was being cornered by men who wouldn't accept evasive answers or bureaucratic deflection. "Sir, I don't see race," Rodriguez stammered, falling back on a phrase that fooled no one. "I treat everyone equally according to established protocols." One of the other SEALs, a man whose name tag read Chief Peterson, let out a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been so devoid of humor. "That's interesting," Peterson said, his voice carrying a slight southern drawl that somehow made his words more intimidating. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you treated this Marine very differently than you would treat anyone else." The crowd of witnesses continued to grow, and Marcus could see Academy staff members beginning to take notice of the commotion. Part of him wished this could all be resolved quietly, but another part of him was grateful that so many people were witnessing what was happening. For too long, incidents like this had occurred in shadows where they could be denied or minimized. Commander Thompson pulled out his phone and began scrolling through something, his expression growing more serious as he read. "I'm looking at the Academy's diversity and inclusion policies right now," he announced, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear clearly. "And it's very clear that discrimination based on race, ethnicity, or any other protected characteristic is strictly prohibited and grounds for immediate termination." Rodriguez was beginning to sweat despite the cool morning air. What had started as a simple power play on his part had escalated into something that threatened his very livelihood. He was facing men who clearly had the knowledge, authority, and determination to follow through on their implied threats. Furthermore, Commander Thompson continued, his voice gaining strength as he built his case, the harassment of graduating cadets and their families represents a serious breach of professional conduct that reflects poorly on this entire institution. Marcus felt a strange sense of unreality as he watched these elite warriors fighting for his honor and dignity. He had spent 4 years proving himself worthy of standing among the Academy's graduates, and now these men were ensuring that his worth was recognized and respected. Lieutenant Commander Morrison nodded in agreement with the SEAL commander's assessment. "This incident will definitely need to be reported to Academy administration. The treatment of Cadet Thompson and his family has been completely unacceptable and contrary to everything this institution stands for." The second SEAL, whose name tag identified him as Petty Officer Martinez, stepped forward to add his voice to the growing chorus of condemnation. "I've had the privilege of serving alongside Marines in multiple deployments," Martinez said, his voice carrying the weight of shared combat experience. "Every one of them earned my respect through their courage, skill, and dedication. This young man is about to join those ranks, and he deserves to be treated with the honor that his service has earned." The words hit Marcus like a physical force, filling him with pride and validation that went far beyond anything he had expected from this day. These weren't just words of support, they were recognition from men who had proven themselves in the ultimate test of combat that he was worthy to stand among America's warriors. Rodriguez was now visibly shaking, realizing that his career was hanging by a thread and that thread was being held by men who had no reason to show him mercy. His attempt to exercise petty authority over a young black cadet had backfired spectacularly, and now he was facing consequences that would extend far beyond this single incident. "Sir," Rodriguez said, his voice barely above a whisper, "perhaps I made an error in judgment. I was just trying to ensure security protocols were followed." Commander Thompson's response was swift and uncompromising. "There was no error in judgment here, Officer Rodriguez. This was a deliberate decision to single out and humiliate a graduating cadet based on your personal prejudices. And that decision is going to have consequences." The third SEAL, Petty Officer Williams, consulted his own phone before speaking. "I'm seeing that Academy security personnel are required to complete annual training on equal treatment and non-discrimination policies. When was your last training session, Officer Rodriguez?" The question clearly caught Rodriguez off guard, and his hesitation in answering suggested that he might not be current on required training. This was yet another violation that could be added to the growing list of his professional failures. Marcus watched as his tormentor was systematically dismantled by men who clearly knew how to identify and exploit weaknesses. It was like watching a perfectly executed military operation, except instead of defeating an enemy position, they were defeating prejudice and injustice. The fourth SEAL, Senior Chief Anderson, had been quietly observing the growing crowd of Academy staff members who were approaching to investigate the commotion. "Looks like we're about to have company," he announced. "Academy administration is heading this way." Commander Thompson nodded, his tactical mind already shifting to the next phase of the operation. "Good. It's time for this incident to be properly documented and addressed through official channels." As the Academy officials approached, Marcus realized that what had started as the worst moment of his life was transforming into something entirely different. These 6 SEALs had not only defended his honor but had turned his humiliation into a teaching moment that would resonate far beyond this single day. The battle was far from over, but, for the first time since Rodriguez had confronted him, Marcus felt confident that justice would prevail. Admiral Patricia Hawkins approached the growing crowd with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to command. As the Academy's deputy superintendent, she had dealt with countless incidents over her distinguished career, but the scene unfolding before her was clearly something out of the ordinary. The presence of 6 Navy SEALs confronting a security guard while a graduating cadet and his family stood nearby told a story that demanded immediate attention. The Admiral's sharp eyes quickly assessed the situation, taking in the defensive posture of Officer Rodriguez, the protective stance of the SEALs around the Thompson family, and the crowd of witnesses that had gathered to watch the confrontation unfold. Behind her came Captain Michael Chen, the Academy's Director of Student Affairs, along with 2 other senior staff members who had been alerted to the developing crisis. "Gentlemen," Admiral Hawkins announced, her voice carrying the authority that came from decades of military service and leadership, "I'm Admiral Hawkins, Deputy Superintendent of this Academy. Someone want to explain to me what's happening here?" Commander Thompson stepped forward, his bearing showing the respect due to a superior officer while maintaining the confidence of a man who knew he was on the right side of this confrontation. "Admiral, I'm Commander Thompson, and these are my teammates from SEAL Team 5. We witnessed what appeared to be discriminatory treatment of a graduating cadet and felt compelled to intervene." The Admiral's expression grew more serious as she processed this information. Discrimination incidents were among the most serious issues that could occur at a military academy, and the fact that elite special operations personnel had felt the need to intervene suggested this was not a minor misunderstanding. "Cadet Thompson," Admiral Hawkins addressed Marcus directly, "please tell me what happened here today, from the beginning." Marcus straightened to attention, his training taking over even in this stressful situation. "Ma'am, I was approaching the ceremony area to meet my family when Officer Rodriguez stopped me and demanded identification. He questioned my right to be here and threatened to have my family removed from the premises when they attempted to support me." The Admiral listened carefully, her experienced ear detecting the pain beneath Marcus's professional composure. She had seen too many promising young officers damaged by prejudice and discrimination, and she was determined not to let it happen on her watch. "Officer Rodriguez,